Workers and families, many of them struggling and in pain, cannot wait until the next presidential election is resolved for the federal government to act to promote job creation. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The senator from New York.
I know that our time expires shortly, and Senator Hatch has...
Senators from the Senate is...
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with. Sorry.
Without objection.
So I'd just like to speak on two other subjects until Senator Leahy arrives. First, I rise in support of a bill that I'll be introducing along with Senators Leahy, Gillibrand, Menendez, Franken, and Klobuchar, called the SSI Extension for Elderly and Disabled Refugees of 2011. The bill, which the Senate is also passing today by unanimous consent, is truly unique because it accomplishes three incredibly important objectives at the same time. It ensures that approximately 5,600 disabled refugees will not lose critical life-sustaining benefits that are their only safety net, protecting them from homelessness, illness, and other effects of extreme poverty. Some of the disabled refugees this bill helps are people who aided American troops overseas in Iraq or Afghanistan and risked their lives for America's cause. Others are victims of torture or human trafficking, whose injuries are so severe that they're now unable to sustain themselves without these benefits. The bill continues the Bush administration policy of making sure that this vulnerable group does not lose their benefits, but unlike past bills, the second key fact about this bill is that it's fully paid for. It's paid for by imposing a $30 fee on individuals applying to enter the country through the Diversity Visa Lottery program. Each year, hundreds of thousands of people apply to be one of the 50,000 individuals allowed to emigrate to the United States, and the program's had great success. I've been very supportive of it. And it's also enriched the American fabric with immigrants from countries that are not traditionally represented in the immigrant pool. But, unfortunately, because applying for a lottery ticket has been traditionally free, the program has recently been compromised by third parties filing applications on behalf of unknowing foreign nationals who then turn around and try to extort money from these nationals if the ticket turns out to be a winning ticket. That's really wrong and unfair. The State Department has told us that by charging this $30 fee will eliminate this misconduct. So it's a win-win. We get some money to pay for these refugees, who we all agree should be admitted here. As I said, many helped us in Iraq and Afghanistan. And at the same time, it doesn't cost us a nickel and eliminates a scam that involves a very worthy program, the diversity visas. Finally, the third great thing about this bill is that by setting the fee at $30, the CBO projects will actually reduce our deficit by $24 million. So it'll help, in a small way, reduce the deficit. So the bill hits the trifecta. It helps a very small, targeted group of the most vulnerable and needy disabled individuals who we've traditionally not abandoned. It virtually eliminates misconduct in the diversity visa program, and it reduces the federal deficit. Because it's a win-win-win for all sides, I ask that my colleagues in the House take up and pass this bill immediately. The benefits for these folks already expired on October 1st, and if we don't act soon, we won't be able to repair the irreparable harm that will be done to these most vulnerable individuals. I want to thank both my co-sponsors and chairman and ranking members of the relevant committees governing this bill, Senators Leahy, Grassley, Baucus, Hatch, Conrad, Sessions, and Cornyn, for allowing the bill to pass. I'd also like to thank Senator Coburn for working with me to allow this bill to pass and address his concerns to make the bill better. We've done something very good today, and I thank all of my colleagues who have joined in the unanimous consent resolution that will pass shortly. I hope the House does the same. Mr. President, since we're awaiting Senator Leahy, I'll continue as if in morning business and on a floor statement on Mr. William F. Kuntz II. He's a nominee to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York. And I want to describe to my colleagues the extraordinary qualifications of Dr. Kunz, the nominee to the bench of the Eastern District, who hopefully will confirm later today. Dr. Kunz has exactly the skills, temperament, and experience to be a perfect addition to one of the busiest U.S. district courts in the country. Dr. Kunz is currently a partner in the New York office of Baker and Hostetler. He's a native of Harlem. He grew up in what was then called the Polo Ground Projects and went to high school at Fordham Prep in the South Bronx. He earned his undergraduate degree from Harvard University, followed by a master's degree in history, a law degree, and a Ph.D. in American legal history, all from Harvard. So I hope no one will hold that against him, and all within 11 years of arriving in Cambridge from Harlem. What an amazing man. What an American dream story. I would venture that throughout this country, Dr. Kunz has few peers in terms of education and training. But he didn't use his degrees to go on to teach and write, a valuable career path to be sure, but possibly not one that would have put his skills as an advocate and his commitment to the people of New York to their highest and best use. Instead, Dr. Kunz went on to log 33 years of litigation experience in some of New York City's finest law firms. And, most impressive to me, he served for 23 years as commissioner on the city's Civilian Complaint Review Board. This independent agency oversees the investigation of citizens' claims of misconduct by New York City police officers. By all accounts, Dr. Kunz staked out an admirable middle ground, informed by hard investigative work and careful consideration of all of the 5,000 cases that came before the board every year. And when my legal committee looked into his work there, he was praised by both the police side and those who brought cases before the board. In that kind of tempestuous situation, that's rare indeed. Dr. Kunz's commitment to public service is long and impressive. He served in leadership positions on the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, the Legal Aid Society, the New York Bar, and the PLI, among others. I'll note that Dr. Kunz will be filling a judicial emergency vacancy in the Eastern District of New York, a court that adjudicates a large share of critical cases such as terrorism and terrorism financing, organized crime, and mortgage fraud. Dr. Kunz is sorely needed and more than up for the task. So I look forward to Dr. Kunz's service on the bench and congratulate him and his family. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. That's the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I ask consent to call the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
And
Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations, which the clerk will report.
Nominations, the judiciary. Henry F. Floyd of South Carolina to be United States Circuit Judge. Nanette Jolivet Brown of Louisiana to be United States District Judge. Nancy Torreson of Maine to be United States District Judge. William Francis Kuntz II of New York to be United States District Judge. Marina Garcia Marmolejo of Texas to be United States District Judge. Jennifer Guerin Zips of Arizona to be United States District Judge.
Under the previous order, there will be 1 hour for debate with respect to the nominations, with the time equally divided in the usual form.
Mr. President, that would bring us to 20 minutes to 6, and I think there was probably an attempt to vote at 5:30, so I would ask consent that the time be still divided in the regular way, but the votes begin at 5:30.
Without objection.
Mr. President, today's consideration of 6 qualified consensus judicial nominations is welcome. It's all too rare. I commend Majority Leader Reid for pressing for Senate votes on all 27 of the judicial nominees fully considered by the Senate Judiciary Committee and waiting final action by the Senate. We have a judicial vacancy rate that stands at 11%. We have 95 vacancies in federal courts around the country. We have to build on today's efforts with the regular consideration of nominations without needless delay. I was talking the other day with Bruce Cohen, who is the Chief of Staff of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chief Counsel, and somebody who's had a great deal of experience working with different senators. We were talking about the fact that there's never been anything like this. We usually, whether it's a Republican president, Democratic president, Republican-controlled Senate, Democratic-controlled Senate, when nominees go through the Senate Judiciary Committee unanimously, supported by the senators from their home states, they're usually within a few days, during wrap-up, voice voted through. Now, once in a while, whoever's leader may need a vote on a Monday afternoon, so the next Monday afternoon, one will be voted on. Of course, it's always 100-0. So we have people go through unanimously, supported by Republican and Democratic senators, and they wait month after month after month. I hope that we can get away from that. I hope for the integrity of our judicial system, we can get away from that. But also just think of the personal count that it means on the people who have been nominated. If you're a lawyer, you're a distinguished lawyer, you're nominated for the federal bench, everybody's going to congratulate you. Saying this wonderful. And then the rest of the law firm is kind of looking at you saying, are you guys going to leave now? When are you going to leave? Because your life's put on hold. You're probably going to take a significant cut in salary anyway, but you can't take on new clients. So anyway, I ask my full statement be included in the record, and I hope this is probably an indication that we'll finally get moving.
Without objection, statement will be submitted for the record.
And Mr. President, as I use my time, my allotted time now as in morning business, I want to talk about the devastating flooding in Vermont, but also our recovery. Last week, my wife Marcel and I probably drove 400 miles around the state of Vermont, inside the state. We're a small state. And the distinguished presiding officer knows how in small states you can go from one end to the other fairly quickly. But we crisscrossed the state over a period of a little over a week, A lot of the time, just the two of us in the car, we just drive around and go and say thank you to volunteers. Some of the things we saw were so touching. People who had lost everything were helping others, and vice versa. The spirit is wonderful, but the reality is that our little state, the state where both my wife and I were born, has been hurt in a way that we have not seen in our lifetime. I have talked about these inspiring actions of Vermonters. One of the things we saw, some of the worst damage caused by the storm has been to the houses and mobile homes and apartments where Vermonters have built their lives, they've made their homes, they've become part of the communities, their kids go to school, they're the fabric of the community. We've seen entire mobile home developments washed away. Where homes once stood now lies a path of damage and destruction and heartbreak. Look at the horrific flooding we have right here. Roads suddenly where there were no roads. Look at the forefront of this picture. House collapsed in on itself. Children's toys, what might have been a playground at one time, now devastated. Had people tell me, we lost everything. And then in tears, we lost our wedding album. We lost the pictures of our children when they graduated from high school. We lost the pictures at their baptism or their bar mitzvah. I mean, it just tears you apart because they've lost not only their homes, they've lost part of their memories. Now, I want to commend my staff both here in Washington and in Vermont because they have worked sometimes literally around the clock. They have worked weekends, evenings, days to help. And they've seen firsthand the ruin, the pain delivered by this disaster. They've seen it with their eyes, but they've seen it in the tearful eyes of families around the state. Over the sounds of generators powering sump pumps and heavy equipment removing debris, we've had countless conversations with people as they stared at foundations, empty foundations, that once held their homes, as they dug toxic muck out of their basements and shops, and as volunteers helped with pulling down wet drywall in a race against the onset of mold. Most of these conversations begin with memories of fast-rising water, but also death-defying rescues. In Northfield, a town just a few miles from where I live, dozens of homes along the peaceful Dog River were flooded with as much as 6 feet of water. One homeowner who escaped the rising waters only by canoe fears the insurance and FEMA assistance will not be enough to help him restore his home, which is part of his life. And like many of the residents of his Water Street neighborhood, he's left wondering whether rebuilding is possible or even worth the effort. In Brattleboro, Mr. President, that's down in the southeast corner of our state. It's along the Connecticut River. The Connecticut River is the boundary between Vermont and New Hampshire. The Brattleboro Housing Authority lost 60 units of housing. They put families in hotels or on their friends' couches, spread throughout the region, as the Housing Authority tries desperately to fix what is lost. I saw a lot of that damage. I went there with Governor Shumlin. I went there with General Doobie, the head of our Vermont National Guard. I saw it. And in Roxbury, beautiful town of Roxbury, one family along a peaceful brook that's normally about 1 foot wide was forced to their roof of their house as floodwaters rose. And the brook became almost instantly a raging rapid more than 20 feet across, 6 feet deep. In Duxbury, the next town over from mine. In Quechee, in Berlin, and nearly a dozen other towns, mobile home parks quickly became submerged. These homes are especially vulnerable to flood damage. They're easily destroyed by a few feet of water. In areas where they've never seen a few feet of water, and suddenly in seconds it's there. Last week in Woodstock, I visited a mobile home park where on the night of the flood, the entire community crowded onto a small mound in the middle of the park waiting rescue as they watched their homes being destroyed. Marcel and I stood on that mound. It was a beautiful fall day, and we stood there. And we looked down, but you could see everything that had been torn up. You could see the gouges. You could see the damage. And I wondered, how can somebody stand there? Not only see their houses destroyed, watch that water come up, and if it comes just a little bit further, you're going to die too. Just 1 week after the flooding, FEMA estimated that more than 900 homes in Vermont had suffered damage. Today, that number continues to grow. Families who found safety and comfort in their homes before Irene now find themselves living in temporary homes and shelters and hotels. And winter is quickly, quietly approaching. Our small state's ability to build new homes depends greatly on support from federal safety net programs like the Emergency Community Development Block Grant funding that I was proud to support and included in the Transportation HUD Appropriations Bill. Now, this emergency funding is a first step in addressing the urgent housing needs of states like Vermont that have been struck by natural disasters. We know much more is going to be needed to help our decimated towns and communities, their citizens, get back on their feet. Housing authorities need Section 8 choice vouchers. Now, these sound just like numbers to people. They are life to the people who depend upon them. They need to provide relief to low-income renters permanently displaced. They need the flexibility to make use of the few available units of government's subsidized housing without the burden of stringent income eligibility requirements. And I am proud that in the Senate, on the Appropriations Committee, over the past several weeks, working so hard, we've been able to make prompt, significant, and bipartisan strides toward addressing the emerging disaster recovery need in states like Vermont and New Jersey and North Carolina. Actually, 48 states in the Union have faced emergency disaster needs this year. Mr. President, I remember the stories my parents and my grandparents told me of flooding long before I was born in Vermont. I'm 71 years old. I've not seen damage and destruction of this magnitude in Vermont in my lifetime. Vermont and other states were hit by Irene are stretched to the limit right now. And just as the victims of past disasters throughout the country were able to rely on their fellow Americans' help in their time of need, including Vermont's help, so should Vermonters be able to count on help when they need it most. And it is regrettable. It is disappointing. Actually, it's incomprehensible that some in Congress continue to insist that assistance can only come at the cost of other federal programs and services relied upon by the American people. Do we take it out of education? Do we take it out of medical research? Do we take it out of job creation? Do we rob Peter to pay Paul? Now, some of these same voices have had no problem with spending hundreds of billions of borrowed dollars on wars waged overseas and on rebuilding communities in Iraq and Afghanistan. They'll borrow the money to rebuild roads and villages and homes in Iraq and Afghanistan. They're going to apply a different standard to emergency disaster recovery efforts that are desperately needed by Americans for Americans here at home in America. It's Alice in Wonderland. An old line Vermonter said to me, and there he said, you know, Pat, we give them money in Iraq and Afghanistan to build homes and bridges and roads, and then they blow them up. Build them here in America. We'll take care of them, and we'll use them. You know, I could give a 10-hour speech on the floor. Those two sentences sum up what I've heard from everybody. I don't care what their political background is or anything else in Vermont. Now is not the time to ask Americans to choose between helping victims of a disaster or to fund cancer research or equipment for first responders or job-creating programs. We need to come together as a country. We always have in the past to pass an emergency disaster bill that provides relief to our states in a time of need. Now, the Senate has answered the call by passing critical disaster relief legislation. It's time for the House to do the same. Let victims of Hurricane Irene start rebuilding their homes. But as they rebuild their homes, Mr. President, they rebuild their lives. As they rebuild their lives, they rebuild our communities. As they rebuild our communities, they rebuild our state. And we are a part of the United States of America. President, I yield the floor. I'm going to suggest the absence of quorum, and I would ask consent the time be equally divided.
Without objection. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Calling of the quorum be suspended.
Without objection.
Today, Mr. President, today the Senate nominees. 4 of these vacancies have been deemed to be judicial emergencies. With these votes, we will have confirmed over 44% of the President's judicial nominees that have been submitted by the President during this Congress, and 66% of all of his judicial nominees. As I have stated, the confirmation of executive and judicial appointments is one of the highest responsibilities of the Senate. It is a duty that we all take seriously. It is not, as some have suggested, a pro forma process. We're not here to merely rubber stamp the President's nominees. Sometimes this process takes a little time. It is the Senate's right and duty to review thoroughly the records, qualifications, and temperament of nominees. Above all, the process is to be treated with respect and with dignity. This is important for the nominees, for the Senate, and for public confidence in our constitutional process. So I was disturbed to read recent news reports regarding what was described as an induction ceremony in the Northern District of California for Judge Edward Chen. I believe at this event, Judge Chen showed disrespect to the Senate and to the confirmation process. I regret that I would have to spend any time on this subject and take away from the confirmation of the pending nominees. But there are important points that need to be addressed to protect our process, and to protect our own individual members. The Senate confirmed Judge Chen last May, 52 to 46. Needless to say, he was not a consensus nominee. Among the concerns about this nomination was Judge Chen's judicial philosophy, his willingness to adopt the empathy standard, and concern that he would not set aside his personal views, largely shaped by his long association with the ACLU. Remarks reportedly made at this recent event indicate our concerns as being valid. I have not seen a transcript of the event, but an article entitled, Chen, quote, Chen toasted, Republicans roasted, end of quote. That quote makes this look like more a political rally than a judicial event. Chief Judge Ware, in commenting on Judge Chen's confirmation, quipped, quote, it makes me wonder if Judge Chen should be running for political office, end of quote. That is what many of us thought was more appropriate for Judge Chen rather than his appointment to a federal judgeship. The news article describes remarks made by Judge Chen, which I can only describe as mocking one of our members, Senator Sessions of Alabama. This is distasteful, if not ironic. It was only after a personal appeal by Senator Feinstein to Senator Sessions that the vote on Judge Chen went forward. Senator Sessions agreed to that vote and pressed other members to let the vote proceed. If the press accounts are accurate, I believe Judge Chen owes an apology to Senator Sessions. Judge Chen went on again to embrace his ACLU background, stating, quote, having the ACLU in your DNA is not a disease, it's an honor, end of quote. As I have said before, Judge Chen's advocacy on behalf of the ACLU is not disqualifying by itself. But I have to wonder about the impartiality of Judge Chen. More importantly, what are potential litigants appearing before Judge Chen to think? If the ACLU is an opposing litigant, is there any way to think Judge Chen can be fair and impartial? I would think mandatory recusal would be required in any ACLU case coming before him. Federal judges must abide by the Code of Conduct for U.S. judges. I will withhold judgment on whether or not Judge Chen violated those canons, but in my opinion, he clearly went too far, particularly with regard to the requirement to uphold the integrity of the judiciary, to avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety in all activities, and lastly, to refrain from political activity. I hope Judge Chen realizes the important responsibility he has and acts accordingly in the future. I also hope this is a lesson to other nominees as they treat this process with respect even after confirmation and appointment. I have been working throughout this Congress to confirm consensus nominees. I continue to remind my colleagues of the progress that we've made. With a hearing in the Judiciary Committee scheduled for tomorrow, 85% of President Obama's judicial nominees will have received a hearing. At this point in President Bush's presidency, only 77% had been afforded a hearing. Not only have we processed a higher percentage of nominees, but we've done it in shorter times. President Obama's circuit court nominees have only had to wait on average 66 days for a hearing. President Bush's circuit court nominees were forced to wait 247 days. In fact, we will be hearing from a Fourth Circuit nominee tomorrow after only 26 days before a committee. None of President Bush's circuit court nominees were afforded a hearing that quickly. President Bush's Fourth Circuit nominees were particularly treated in a harsh manner. My friends on the other side of the aisle allowed 4 qualified and consensus nominees to languish at a time when the Fourth Circuit was 1/4 vacant. President Obama's district court nominees have also received better treatment. On average, they have waited only 79 days for a hearing. President Bush's district court nominees waited 247 days. These nominees are also being reported out of committee at a quicker pace as well. On average, President Obama's circuit and district court nominees have been reported more than 66 days faster than President Bush's. All in all, we've taken positive action on 85% of President Obama's judicial nominees this Congress. Even though I'm proud of this progress, I must note I will continue to focus on quality confirmed over quantity confirmed. Shortly, we will be voting on Henry Ford, who was nominated to the Appeals Court for the Fourth Circuit. This is President Obama's 5th nominee to be confirmed in this circuit. President Bush's nominee to the Fourth Circuit from South Carolina, Steve Matthews, did not receive the same treatment. In fact, he went 484 days without so much as a hearing, let alone an up or down vote. Not only was he blocked, not only that, but he was blocked from being considered. I would note the seat to which he was nominated was subsequently filled by a nominee from North Carolina rather than South Carolina, where the vacancy arose. Another vacancy we will be voting on tonight is the District of Arizona seat held by late Judge Roe. Before his tragic and untimely death on January the 8th, 2011. The entire Judicial Committee felt this great loss. After Judge Roe's murder, I repeatedly implored the administration to focus on filling this seat as quickly as possible. It was deemed to be a judicial emergency instantly because of his death. However, it took over 5 months for the administration to nominate Judge Jennifer Zips to the seat, even though she was sitting magistrate judge. Since the President took his time in submitting a nomination, I felt it appropriate to work with the chairman to move this nomination through in an expeditious manner. Nominated in late June of this year, Judge Zips received her hearing a mere 34 days later. Judge Zips was reported to the floor shortly after we returned from the August recess, and I'm happy to have continued this fast pace and are confirming her for a lifetime position today. In addition to Judge Floyd and Judge Zips, we will confirm Nanette Brown to be U.S. District Judge for the Eastern District of Louisiana, Nancy Torreson to be U.S. District Judge, District Maine, William Francis Kuntz to be District Judge for Eastern District, New York, Mariana Garcia Maramlo to be District Judge for the Southern District of Texas. I'm pleased to support each of these nominees, and I thank them for their public service and congratulate them for their prior accomplishments and confirmation today. And I ask unanimous consent that my full statement be entered in the record at this point because it talks about the qualifications of each of these judicial nominees.
Without objection, the statement will be included in the record.
And I yield the floor. And I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from South Carolina.
I'd ask unanimous consent to terminate the quorum call.
Without objection.
And I'd like to rise and speak on two topics very briefly. The nomination of Judge Henry Floyd to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals and the motion to proceed on China currency. Thank you. First, Judge Henry Floyd has been nominated by President Obama to serve on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond, Virginia. He has a lot of bipartisan support from South Carolina. He was nominated by President Bush, to be a district court judge. He served as a state court judge before that, and he has got a distinguished record as a state and federal jurist. He's an outstanding choice by the President to serve on the First Circuit Court of Appeals. I've known him for many years. I've practiced law with him. I've appeared before him as a state judge and has followed his career. He is unanimously rated well qualified to proceed to the Fourth Circuit. He has an outstanding legal background, great temperament, and is one of the most qualified district court judges in South Carolina, and he will serve the people of the Fourth Judicial Circuit well on the Court of Appeals. He has the kind of intellect and common sense that I think most people in this part of the country would appreciate having on the circuit court. So I want to thank the Obama administration and urge my colleagues to vote for this well-qualified, fine man to go to the First Circuit Court of Appeals, Court of Appeals, and he has a lot of bipartisan support at home. Everyone that knows Judge Floyd is a big fan, right, left, center. Now, the issue after this vote is whether or not the Senate should proceed to debate legislation that I've authored with Senator Schumer and others dealing with the currency exchange practices of the communist dictatorship of China. I've been involved in this now for almost 7 years. We've done a sense of the Senate resolution back in 2004, I believe it was, urging the Chinese to change their currency policy. What does this mean to the average American? The exchange rate today is 6.38 yuan to the dollar. Now, when you look at the dollar to the euro, I don't know what it's trading today, but it goes up and down every day. China's economy is growing at 9 and 10%. They're the second largest economy in the world. They're moving like gangbusters. And does it really matter for them to suppress the value of the currency? Yes, it does. And any objective observer looking at the history of the way the Chinese government deals with their monetary policy would conclude that they keep the yuan below its true value to create a discount on products made in China. Look at it this way. If you're competing with China in the world marketplace, it's one thing to have cheap labor to compete against. It's another thing to have the government of China directly supporting their industries in a way we don't hear. But when you add intellectual property theft, you do business in China, the next thing you know, a Chinese company across the street is producing the very product you went to China to produce. So the Chinese government needs to follow the rule of law and live with the norms of the international business practices. And when it comes to currency manipulation, it is just impossible to believe that the dollar to yuan ratio exists without the government manipulating the value of the yuan. People estimate that it's 25 to 40% below its true value. Now, what does that mean? That means if you're competing with China selling the same product made in China, there's a discount on the Chinese product based on the value of their money. And the trade deficit with China has exploded. Last year it was $273 billion. We're at $160.4 in July of this year. And cheap exports coming out of China is a source of cash for the Chinese government and Chinese industry. You can't convert the currency in China. In the United States, you can take your money and convert it to any currency you would like. If a Chinese manufacturer sells a product in the United States and they get paid in dollars, they have to convert it to the yuan. They have very restrictive monetary policies, and the ban of trading on the yuan is 0.5% a day. The dollar can fluctuate based on all kind of economic forces, our debt, our trade deficit, what's going on here at home, but the Chinese government restricts the value, the fluctuation of the currency in a way that costs us jobs. It's estimated that over 2 million jobs have been lost over the last decade because of currency manipulation alone. It is one way to get an unfair advantage in the marketplace. Over 41,000 jobs have been lost in South Carolina alone because companies can't compete with China. So this legislation would allow the Treasury Department to create new criteria to monitor the currency practices of the Chinese government. And if it is found to be misaligned or manipulated, the Treasury Department can bring countervailing duty proposals, countervailing duty action against China. We've done this before when the Chinese dump steel into our market. If a country is violating the international trading standards or business norms, we have under the WTO the ability to fight back. And what this legislation would do is it would elevate currency manipulation. It's one thing to dump a product like steel or tires into the American economy, creating an unfair advantage for the Chinese manufacturing community. We have tools to deal with that, but we haven't embraced pushing back against currency. Now, China should be a great place to do business, but it's not. It should be more balanced than it is. I want to do business with China. I just don't want trade deficits of $273 billion that are artificially created. If they do something better than us, they should win in the marketplace. That's just the way business works. But if the government intervenes and creates an advantage for a Chinese company, that's not winning in the marketplace. And this would not matter if it were a country like the Dominican Republic or some small country where they have to keep the currency in check because you don't want wild swings of your currency. But when you're a major economic power like China, like the United States, like European countries, you can't play that game. So I hope my colleagues will vote to allow this debate to go forward, because this is about American jobs at the end of the day. So with that, I yield back and notice the absence of a quorum.
Mr. Akaka.